Welcome back. It is Bones. And in this one, let's go ahead and take a look at some custom work that I have done on some DC Multiverse figures. Now, these are all little projects that I've been working on off and on for a while, adding little details, changing up stuff, and eventually I'm pretty happy with most of them, so I wanted to go ahead and take a look at them. Now, I did do some pretty cool little custom tricks and hints that I'll let you guys know, but I thought these would be pretty interesting to take a look at. And as always, one of my favorite things is to take these McFarlane figures and make them my own, whether that's adding some paint detail or customizing or adding some weapons. All in all, it is very fun for me, this little hobby that I have with DC action figures. I've been doing it for a while now, as it will be easy to see by the customs I have done. Let's go ahead and start off. I am proud to say that I'm going to be keeping this version of the recently released classic Superman this way with the mods and the different details that I have added. Now, the reason I'm doing this now is because a couple of days ago, I did see that Best Buy had this classic Superman for $19.99. So I went ahead and picked up two of those, one to keep mint in box, and of course, one the way it is released standard, but on my standard shelf. And then this one will, of course, be my custom that I could do with what I please. I may still in the future change out the cape because I'm not the biggest fan of that cape, but for right now, it does work pretty well. Now, of course, let's take a look at the little things that I changed on him. Of course, I gave him a Superman 1000 head sculpt, just because that is still my favorite Superman head sculpt that McFarlane has made. And not only is it my favorite, it is the one that captures the best portrait of the Kryptonian. So I pretty much prefer to use that head sculpt with a lot of the custom Supermans that I have done. Love this blue that they used. That is a classic color for him. So I'm really happy with the way this guy looks. So one thing I did do, of course, as I showed in my review of him, is I switched out the hands for the Fury of the Gods Shazam hands. They just fit a lot better than those big meat grinders that he came with. And although all you need to do actually is heat them up and they do slide onto the peg that comes with this figure, you can always switch out the wrist joints as well if that is your preference. But the fists look really good. They do look more proportional than the original fist, so I'm happy with that. And of course, the other thing I did is I changed out the trunks. Now, I'm pretty sure these trunks came from the first appearance Superman, the collector's edition. And since I'm doing a custom one of those, I had these trunks left over. Now, it wasn't so easy as to just switch out the trunks. I actually had to change out the hip undercarriage, taking off the one that comes standard with this figure and replacing it with the one from the first appearance Superman. And then another thing I had to do was actually like shrink down the circumference of the trunks because they were way too large. And I did do that by splitting him down the sides, matching it, and then gluing it back together. I also did a little bit of drilling on the inside where the carriage slips in to push the trunks back to actually make it a little bit more snug of a fit. Now, someone did comment that if I didn't want to show the back because I didn't mod it, but actually I did mod it. And if you look at the back, you can see that the trunks are smaller, so they do fit around the waist. Now, there is a trick to cutting these and gluing them back together. It is not as simple as that because if you do it just like that, you do have a tendency for the seam to split again. Now, this is a trick that I've used, and I'm going to let you guys know. You get a really thin piece of plastic. It could be any form of plastic that you have, but it has to be really thin. And what I usually do is where I cut the seam and I re-glued it, I usually re-glue it straight like this. But once that dries, I actually glue a really thin piece of plastic right on the seam, and I put a lot of super glue on it and glue it there and let it dry. And what that does is that little strip of thin plastic glues onto both ends of the seam, and that actually keeps it from separating. That way you can still, retain articulation and, lift up his legs without being worried of splitting the trunks again. But all in all, I am really happy with the way he looks. Now, I did want to pair him up with somebody, and of course, who better to pair him up with than the more classic looking Batman that we have? And actually, these two guys are about the same height. This Nightfall Batman, not being one of the taller Batmans. Basically, he's a little shrimp, but that works out because he matches up well with this Superman, because of course this Superman isn't really that tall. So these two together actually look really good. You have a pretty classic looking Kal-El, and you have a classic looking Dark Knight. Now these actually look perfect together. Pretty awesome little world's finest you got going on there. So I am pretty happy with the way this little Kit Bash custom Superman actually came out. Happy with that. Now the next one we'll look at is actually my revamped Regeneration suit Superman. Now I've been working on this guy for almost a year, I would say. Now, his very first version was actually with the beard, with long hair. And although I did like that, the way it looked, that was just something I put together really quickly. And I knew that eventually I would want, a regeneration suit Superman, but that looks a lot more like the 90s version from the reign of the Superman. Now, when we received the mullet Superman in the collector's edition, the Superman with crypto, I really knew my intentions were going to be to use that head sculpt actually on my regeneration suit. Now, about this same time, I actually changed out the trunks. These are actually the trunks from a Captain Atom figure, and they were the plainest trunks that didn't have any sculpt design or lines, and that is actually the look I was going for. Now, of course, this is the black suited Superman from the waist up, but I did change out the legs and the feet because I wanted it to have more of that, sort of pajama, thinner look that is the same as the comics for the regeneration suit. So I used the Omega legs from the Last Night on Earth wave and also the feet. That allowed me to actually paint these little boot tips that are a more traditional look for your regeneration suit. You could get them in flying poses, make them really make them look really good with those boot tips. Love this figure. He actually came out really good. It's just taken me a while to get him exactly how I wanted. Now, one of the things I did have to do was actually paint the neck because, of course, the neck that comes with that original black suited Superman is really pale, and the head sculpt from the collector's edition had more of a darker flesh tone color to it. So I did mix up some paint, matched it up pretty well, hit it with some matte sealer. That way you can still articulate the head. And for all intents and purposes, I'm really satisfied the way he came out. A lot more traditional look of the regeneration suit Superman, the way he looks in the comics. Now, I did want to pair him up with somebody, and that brings up something else, a little custom that I did. that I wanted to show you guys, and that is Steel. Now, the thing about Steel, of course, if you check out my review of him, I repainted him, added a lot of shiny, almost chrome silver to a lot of his apparatuses that he has on his power suit. But one thing I did want to change was the handle of the hammer. Now, aside from it being really, really thin, it was really soft where, it didn't hold up at all. So I know a lot of people, weren't happy with this. I know my boy Toy Gains actually did one of these where he switched out the handle, but I have, of course, my own version. Now, what I actually used was the staff that comes with the Red Robin Tim Drake figure. Now, of course, I gave him a staff that actually fits a lot better with him. So I didn't really mind using one of these to do a little customizing with Steel's hammer. Now, of course, I always tell you guys I'm not a big like tutorial recorder. It gets really awkward for me, especially when I start doing something and I don't have time to, grab the camera and holding it up here on the desk. It really gets annoying. But I did try and get some images of what I did. I kind of measured it out where I wanted to cut the staff to make it the length that it originally came in. So I decided to make these cuts here. Now I did save the little ends because for some reason I just said, you know what, those look really good to hold on to for some future custom fodder. So I held on to those. Then I went ahead and made the cuts where I needed to. Now, of course, I wanted to save the little tip on the end of the hammer. So I also cut that off to glue it onto this version. And then, of course, I cut off the head of the hammer. Now, I did get some images of this so you could kind of get the idea of what I did. So once I was ready and happy with the length of the staff, I actually drilled a hole in the hammer. Now you do want to get this right in the center. At first I drilled a pilot hole with a smaller drill bit. I progressively used a bigger drill bit until the staff actually fit right into the hole. Now, big surprise, the hammer head was actually hollow. So that kind of surprised me, but it kind of worked out good because you can actually pull back and forth the staff and make it a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. And it is actually really stuck in there. So I'm not necessarily going to super glue it because that way I could move it still and adjust it. But it actually worked out really well. Of course, the last step is I glued that little tip to the end just to make it, official. And then I just hit that with a little bit of shiny silver. So I didn't have to actually paint the bow staff part. That actually matches perfectly with the hammer. So that's why this was kind of a really nice little custom because it actually worked out well. The silvers matched. You don't have to paint it. And one other benefit is that the staff is a little bit thicker and it actually works a lot better with the steel figure to have a nice little bit thicker of a staff for steel to hold on to. So these two guys actually look really good together. This is more of a traditional comic looking, duo of the Regeneration suit Superman and Steel. So pretty happy with this work as well. Now I do want to show you guys my custom yellow oval Hush Batman. Now, if you don't know, Hush Batman is by far my favorite Batman that McFarlane has released, besides Grim Knight. But yeah, as comic book style, this guy is awesome. And I don't know where I got the idea or where I, got the inspiration, but I just wanted a version with the yellow oval instead of that big black bat symbol. So I started to think where I can actually get an oval. And this is pretty interesting because I actually used an extra Batman 1000, but the blue version, which had the yellow oval. And I started to cut it up to extract the oval. And what actually ended up happening, which was really surprising, is that it's actually a separate piece that actually popped out of the chest. So once I popped it out, and I was like really surprised that it wasn't like just a piece of the, like it wasn't just imprinted on the plastic, it was actually a separate piece. I heated it up and slimmed it down a little bit because, of course, I didn't want it too thick so it would stick out really far. But I also do prefer sculpted out emblems. So I did, want it to stick up just a tad. And now the biggest thing I had to do was I actually had to remove the big black bat symbol, make up some epoxy, fill it in, let it dry, sand it again, which is pretty tedious. And then, of course, once it cured, I was able to glue on the yellow emblem. Now, I wanted to do this first because if you paint something and then super glue something onto it, it has a tendency to just fall off because it'll basically pull the paint that you put on there instead of actually gluing itself to plastic, or in this case into the epoxy. So once I centered it and glued it, then I had to try and actually match the gray paint from the upper torso. Now this was really difficult. Took me a lot of tries. I even had to add a little bit of filler because, of course, it has like slight imperfections. But after everything was done, it worked out really well. Love the way he looks. Now, surprisingly, I had already changed out his utility belt to the yellow belt when I did another Hush Batman custom. So he already had the yellow belt attached to his body. And I just thought it worked out perfectly because now you have that really high yellow belt and it matches with the yellow bat symbol, making this a really cool customized Hush Batman. So in the end, everything worked out pretty well. And that's how a lot of the times my customs happen is, I just start doing it and it happens to work the way it works out. And you'll find that sometimes the customs just make themselves as long as you put in the work. Now, of course, who do I want to match up with this Batman? But of course, my definitive Superman. Now, this custom is one that I'm really proud of. And if you didn't know, I actually made this from a vampire Batman with other assorted parts. But he is by far one of the best custom McFarlane Supermans that I have seen. Still have not seen anybody basically top this one. It did take me a lot of work, but I'd actually be interested to get another get another go at him, and because now I've done it once, so I could probably, do some things a little bit better. But I love this Superman figure. He is awesome. He does have the yellow S in the back, the traditional colors. And I think my favorite part about him, beyond everything else, is the fact that he matches up perfectly in height with the Hush Batman. So that's what I always tell people is that I don't mind having different sizes of Batman and Superman because eventually you could use them in different setups, different figure photography. These are like my two taller versions of, Batman and Superman. And then these are a little bit shorter version, but it all works out well. You have different choices and different styles of the world's finest. Now, one little thing I did want to add at the end, and that was, what did I do with the long haired, bearded Superman head that I had worked a lot? I had worked on a long time, and then now I have just replaced it with this mullet Superman head. And another reason I did this is because I have another Crypto and Superman already coming in the mail. That will replace actually my collector's edition Superman that I actually want on my collector's edition shelf. Now, what did I do with that body? I actually used that body over here with a Dark Knight Returns Superman head. Now, I actually repainted the eyes to make them a little bit more forward looking and a little bit more blue. And I thought it was just fun to have an alternate color scheme Superman for the Dark Knight Returns. So that was, worked itself out in the end. But as I said, what did I end up doing with my long haired, bearded Kal-El that I actually used to have on this Regeneration suit? Well, I just went ahead and bought another Lois and Clark Superman. And I think this cost me like $15. And I just switched out the long haired head on him. So now he's basically back to the way he was where I started. Maybe I might hit the boots and the chest emblem with a little bit of really shiny silver just to differentiate him from the short haired version, which I do have on my standard shelf. But as I said before, you work on customs, or at least I do, and I don't really have a plan as such. I just go with the flow, and whatever happens usually works itself out in the end. But really happy with these customs. I hope you guys, enjoy customizing as much as I do. It can be a little bit difficult at first, but the more you do it, the more you learn, and eventually you could make some really awesome custom figures. But anyways, you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, of course, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Batman.